So then we get Heidegger writing in 1949 the question concerning technology, and Heidegger's work is something. One of the problems with Heidegger is that and what makes him so frustrating to the first timer is that his essays all sort of presuppose each other. It's like they have this web of intertextual referentiality between them, such that you need to understand all the ideas of all the essays in order to understand any one of them. So it takes a while. None of his essays can be understood on a first reading. You have to read them at least 2 or 3 times, and you have to have already read about 10 or 15 of them before any one of them starts to become intelligible in a real way. That sounds like a lot of work to do, and it is. So Heidegger is not really read by people. Heidegger is a kind of philosopher's philosopher. It's almost like the equivalent with classical music in the 20th century, when it began to become more and more elite and esoteric and more difficult for the outsider to appreciate it without a vast knowledge of the history of music, so you can understand it. Heidegger is something like that in the position of philosophy. But he's definitely worth reading. The harder you work at Heidegger, the more meaning you get back. His texts are extraordinarily rich in ideas. They're very well thought out, and there are no wasted words. Everything counts in Heidegger. Now, he had made himself famous with Being in Time, which was a work, one of the great works of existentialism. This was written in 1927, and that work, that's really his only book. That's not only his major work, but his only book. After that, all of his other works are entirely essays. So he was a master essayist. But they do constitute this one gigantic. It's as though he's writing chapters of a gigantic, never finished book. But in Being in Time, the main thing he had set out to do was to solve certain problems in philosophy having to do with the role of the subject. And Husserl was his great mentor. And what he did was he sort of turned Husserl upside down. Husserl had said that knowing is our primal, basic mode. Thinking is what differentiates us. It's what we are. Heidegger comes along in Being in Time and turns that upside down, and he says, no, living is primary, thinking is secondary. We're always already embedded in a particular life world, and we always find ourselves thrown into the circumstances of a world, and thinking is a secondary elaboration. And in Being in Time, he made a distinction between 3 different modes of being: Vorhandenheit, Zuhandenheit, and Dasein. Dasein is the mode of being that is specific to the human mode of being in the world, and it's basically defined by custom. We are what we do is the basis of Dasein, but it's essentially a taking of the subject and embedding him in a life world. Now the subject, ever since Descartes, had been this sort of transcendental ego. For Descartes, it's the cogito, and it's this sort of transcendental ego floating around as a pure subject, beholding these pure objects. And in Kant, the subject becomes the transcendental unity of apperception, which is just a fancy term for the self. And then in Husserl, it's the transcendental ego. And the problem that Heidegger saw with all of this subject-object dichotomy is that the subject is just sort of floating around in this theoretical phase space. And he's basically dehistoricized. And so what he does is he embeds the subject, he puts him back in the life world, plugs him back in. This is called being in. We are beings in the world. In is key there. We are in a world always. And so he embeds him back in the life world, and that becomes Dasein, the human mode of being in the world. Now there are these 2 other modes, Vorhandenheit. Vorhandenheit is the mode of self-subsistent entities. That is to say, beings that are not in a world, but are outside a world, and have become theoretical entities. So anything can be. This is the way that science basically. He says that science de-worlded the world. It unworlded the world. And the way it did that was, if you imagine the way that Descartes looks at nature, he creates this analytical phase space, a geometrical phase space, using analytical geometry with an x and y axis to plot nature and the motions of objects. Newton comes along and does the same thing. He's got the 3 laws of motion, universal gravitation, and it's this sort of ideal world, but it's not the real world. It's a world that's opposed to the real world, very similar to Plato's opposition of being from becoming. And Heidegger always trace the fall of philosophy, the separation of being from becoming, to Plato. Because he says that before that, the West's earliest understanding of being was being as physis, which was the pre-Socratic understanding of being. And the idea of physis was that objects come into being, things rather come into being, they whoosh up, they flash forth their essences, and they disappear. But they're absolutely numinous, and they are objects that inspire the wonder that the philosophers talk about. And it's almost as though the world were this sort of gigantic Paul Klee painting with these glowing, numinous, fascinating objects that rise up, flower forth, and vanish. And so being is embedded in becoming for the pre-Socratics. It's immanent, and that's the thing he likes about them. And then with the understanding of being that comes with Plato and Aristotle, there's a kind of divorce of being from becoming. Plato lifts being out of becoming and shifts it up into a transcendental world. He basically he does the same thing that our Western scientists have done. He dehistoricizes the world, lifts it up from the phenomenal realm of experience, and because for him, anything that appears to the senses is not of any relevance. This is evident in his shift of the term eidos, and the shift of the term eidos for the pre-Socratics, where eidos was the visible aspect of something, the phenomenal visible aspect that a form wore. For Plato, the eidos becomes the idea, which exists in the transcendent realm of the ideas, the universals. And then there's a medieval understanding of being that comes next, in which God is the ultimate ground of being, guaranteeing all truth. So anytime we make a true statement in the medieval worldview, truth is the adequation of intellect with things, the agreement of intellect with things, but only insofar as those things match the ideas in the mind of God. God has all the ultimate forms. Basically, the Platonic forms were put by the Christians inside God's head, and that becomes the ground of being that guarantees the truth of things, of statements and propositions. And so that's the medieval understanding of being. And then there's a later understanding that we'll get to in a minute that science first begins to map out, and then becomes, with the Industrial Revolution, what Heidegger will call enframing. The understanding of being is enframing. We'll get to that in a bit. And then he prophesizes, as it were, in his essay on the turning, a mode of being that will come after science, in which being will be understood in a way that's different from the way that science understands it. But anyhow, this idea of Vorhandenheit is the mode of self-subsistent entities. So any entity that is divorced and decontextualized from a world is in the mode of Vorhandenheit. It's theoretical. And he was reacting in this to Husserl's treatment of objects as these little perceptual bundles. Objects are analyzed by Husserl with all of these perceptual qualities, and he sort of cuts them out of the real world and puts them up as though we were making a still life out of them. And so that's the mode of Vorhandenheit. Anytime something is deworlded and decontextualized and turned into a pure perception or a purely theoretical construct, it's in the mode of Vorhandenheit. Now the opposite mode from that then is Heidegger's mode that he privileges, which is Zuhandenheit. And Zuhandenheit is the mode of objects in the world embedded in a web of referentiality. Objects refer to each other. Tools presuppose other tools, and they presuppose a world in which everything makes sense because it's all embedded. It's in the flow. When I'm using a tool, let's say I'm using a hammer, and I'm embedded in a life world, the hammer is in the mode of Zuhandenheit. It's ready to hand. In Vorhandenheit, objects are present at hand insofar as they are present as pure perceptual constructs. But if my hammer breaks, suddenly it becomes conspicuous. It's no longer in the mode of Zuhandenheit, but it's become a problem, and it has been brought into question as an object, as something to be thought about. So objects in the theoretical mode and Vorhandenheit are to be thought about. Objects in the mode of Zuhandenheit are to be used. So there's the difference. It's a little bit, it's not that far away from Spengler's distinction between the fact man and the truth man. He had made a distinction, if you remember from one of our previous discussions, between the theoretical man, for whom the world is a theoretical construct based on the principle of causality, and this statesman, or the fact man, for whom the world is about accomplishing actual deeds. It's similar to that, Vorhandenheit and Zuhandenheit. It's not that different, and it may have been influenced by Spengler. There's a lot of consistency here from Nietzsche and Spengler to Heidegger. So those are the main modes of understanding in being in time. And the other aspect, though, of Vorhandenheit is that people, too, one of the problems with science is that it puts people into the mode of anonymous entities, Vorhandenheit. They become these its, these anonymous entities, das Man, the they, are all these other entities. And they're purely anonymous quantities. They're not people that I want to know or get to know. They've been de-authenticated. And being in time is all about the quest for the authentic life. Heidegger wants the individual to find an authentic life. And he loses and dissipates himself when he fails to achieve that authenticity, and he becomes simply one of the them, one of the they, das Man. That's also a mode of Vorhandenheit. And so one of the things about Heidegger is it's crucial to understand is that he was engaged in a lifelong agon against science. Everything that he wrote had something to do with standing up to science and going against it. This is why he spent his life living in a cabin in the Black Forest, and didn't like cities. And another one of the things he says about science is that it de-authenticates the world, and it effaces the distinction between Dasein and the world in such a way that it begins to erode the boundaries between them, and Dasein loses a sense of authenticity and simply becomes basically fallen. He's basically painting a picture of modern man as a being who is fallen. We're thrown into the world. It's very similar, as Hans Jonas pointed out in his book on the Gnostic religion, to Jonas was one of Heidegger's pupils, to the Gnostic idea that we're fallen and trapped in the world, and that the way to get out of it is by attaining gnosis and realizing that we are sparks of light that have fallen down into the world. Heidegger's portrait of modern man is very similar to that. So that's the background, the main background discussion that leads into the writing of these essays on the question concerning technology. Now, in order to understand what's going on in the question concerning technology, we have to look back for a second at his 1930 essay on the essence of truth. And it's in this essay that he comes up with a rather unique and ingenious theory of what he thinks truth is all about, or what the essence of truth is. So he says he's looking for the essence of truth. And he says the traditional understanding of truth as the agreement of knowledge with its object is a cliche that conceals the real meaning of truth. This idea of concealment is going to be central to the idea, and it's also related to his idea of destruction that he creates, that Derrida will later pick up and turn it into deconstruction. Destruction, Abbau, as Heidegger puts it, is what happens when you go back and you clear out all these basic worn out ideas that have concealed our understanding of something, so that we can't see it in a fresh way without going back and weeding out the concealments. And the concealments are normally cliches, traditional interpretations, like the subject-object dichotomy in philosophy, or the idea of truth as the adequation of the intellect with things. These are cliches. They're concealments. They conceal the truth of things, and an Abbau has to be performed by destroying these old concepts. And a lot of Heidegger, you'll notice that a lot of Heidegger's metaphors here are rural, rustic metaphors. They're like going out into the forest and clearing out weeds to see what the clear thing is underneath. And his idea of truth as unconcealment is very similar to walking out into a meadow where suddenly everything's clear. The Lichtung, as he calls it, the clearing. So there's that. Now, so the old idea of truth that he wants to get rid of is this idea that truth is the agreement of the intellect with its object, with objects, the adequatio theory of the Middle Ages. He says that's the old idea. And his understanding of truth is a different thing. It's a relationship between the subject, or let's say the inquirer, the questioner, and the object, the entity, that creates a relationship between them, and the subject puts propositions, tests the world by putting propositions to it that open up certain aspects of entities, objects in the world. And these openings then create an open region between the entities and the questioner in such a way that certain facets of the world come out of unconcealment. And there's a disclosedness there in the truth event that reveals facets about the world that have otherwise been hidden. They may have been hidden underneath bad concepts, or they just may simply not be evident, may not have been evident to someone. But the idea of it is that what happens in the truth process, and this is truth is aletheia. Aletheia is the Greek word for revealing. Truth is a revealing whereby certain propositions are put to the world and to entities, and they unconceal themselves in that process. But at the same time as they unconceal themselves, and you get this sort of, there's almost a mythological dimension to Heidegger's thinking. It's very Germanic in this sense. This you can sort of visualize in your mind this dark, murky realm out of which things are just surfacing into view and then going back down and surfacing into view and dissolving again. That's kind of the way the structure of his mind, the way it works, is that visual image of the emergence of light out of darkness. That's a basic mythological idea. And then so in this process of aletheia, of unconcealment, there's a simultaneous concealment. Things do not always just reveal every facet about themselves. They simultaneously unconceal and conceal facets of themselves. So there's always this transcendent aspect of things in the world, whereby error is always built into the truth process. Human beings, he says, are in the mode of existence. We exist. And by that he means not the existence of Dasein, but the existence means that we are open to all possibilities that phenomena have. There are all these possibilities, and we're open to them, but in making truth propositions, truth statements, we insist. We take a stance, a particular stance toward the world, toward things, and in taking that stance, making that insistence, the possibilities collapse. A lot of them disappear into that dark manifold that I was talking about, and only certain aspects of it come into view, unconceal themselves, come into what Heidegger calls the clearing, Lichtung. That's aletheia. It's things flashing forth phenomenally and coming into the clearing, but they're not ever completely clear. We have to imagine the object as it comes into the clearing with certain murk around it. Things hide aspects of themselves. So as a result of this, then, the crucial point here is that the truth process can never be complete, and it can never be total, because error is built into it fundamentally. Every truth system is flawed and incomplete by the definition of the truth process as an unconcealing simultaneously with a concealing. Aspects of phenomena withdraw into the darkness at the same time that they reveal certain aspects of themselves. And then he specifically has in mind here the way science has gone about putting a kind of imperial gaze to the world that sort of wants it to conform to what it wants from it. And in doing so, it distorts the revealing process and makes it seem as though there is only one stance. There is only one possible process of revealing, the scientific way, as though it were the only way. But the propositions that science puts toward the world, toward entities, that causes things to unconceal and simultaneously conceal, the aspects of things that are concealed, he says, the artist is the one who picks up these things about the world that have been concealed, these aspects of being that have been concealed, and makes them visible, brings them into visibility. The artist is a world maker. He creates worlds, and he makes hidden aspects of being visible. Now, being, the way Heidegger means it, being with the capital B, is the background practices and prescriptions that make anything intelligible as such. in a given age. So being is specific, as we've seen, to specific historical epochs, and the way that people understand their world is always different from epoch to epoch. Custom dictates that. Another word for being might be custom, although it has more connotations than just that. So the artist is able to pick up on these aspects of being, of the world, that have withdrawn themselves. And so it's very similar to McLuhan's idea that the job of the artist is to make an invisible environment visible, and thereby create a counter environment to the prevailing visible environment. The artist has got kind of built-in radar for this. And so that's the theory of truth is Aletheia. And it's brilliant because, as you can see, it's a foundational text in making a lot of what happens in postmodern thinking possible, because it basically says that there's no complete truth system, and it implies that philosophers, let's say the Ken Wilber type, who try to present the world as complete in a complete system, is an impossibility. It's an impossibility for them to do this, because no truth system is complete. Everyone is flawed by definition, and error is built into every truth system. So we can have no master narratives that can pretend to completion, and then just as Derrida picks up this current, and there can be no authoritative final interpretation of anything. And so you can see how a lot of what happens in postmodernism is a set of responses to questions initially put and opened up by Heidegger in this essay. So it's a crucial essay, the essay on the essence of truth. And it's necessary to understand then his idea of truth as Aletheia in order to make sense out of what he says about technology, which we're going to get to now. So he writes this essay on the question concerning technology in 1949. And he starts off by saying then that he wants to ask about, he's questioning concerning technology, and he specifically wants to know what the essence of technology is. And he says, the essence of technology isn't technological. It cannot be technology or anything technological, just as the essence of treeness has nothing to do with this or that particular tree, but is essential. It's the essence of treeness. So he's looking for the essence of technology, not any particular collection of gadgets or some total of technology. And he says that the common assumption about technology is that, as he says, technology is a means to an end. Everyone knows that, and it's a human activity. And then he starts off by looking then at the four causes and how things are brought into being. Everything in Heidegger is concerned with this basically mythological attitude of generation, how things come into being and manifest themselves and disappear. It's very mythological. Even though those mythic substructures are behind his concepts. His concepts conceal myths. If James Hillman had said in Revisioning Psychology that there are gods in our ideas, there are definitely gods in Heidegger's ideas. They're hidden in there, if you know where to look for them. So he looks at the four causes and he says, imagine a chalice, a silver chalice, and he says, let's look at what has brought this forth. The material cause of the silver chalice is silver. That's what it's made out of. And its formal cause is its eidos, its aspect, its shape, its form, basically. That's the formal cause. And then its final cause is that for which it has been brought into being in the first place, namely to perform a role in a ritual. And the efficient cause then is the silversmith then, who combines these causes together and brings the chalice into being. That's the efficient cause. So that's the traditional process of bringing something into being. And so then he says that there are, in terms of coming into being, there are these two aspects. The Greek understanding of poiesis. Poiesis is that by means of which things are made, and it's actually another mode of revealing, a mode of aletheia, that is, insofar as that poiesis covered technological objects as well as artistic objects. But it has the connotations, what poiesis reveals are things, and he doesn't say this, I'm reading between the lines, but he implies it, is that things are well made, they are crafted, there's been loving care put into them. That's poiesis. There's a sense of cultivation in the traditional creation of objects, whether they were works of art or whether they were technological. They were made carefully and lovingly. There was care put into them. So poiesis reveals that kind of care and concern and cultivation in how the ancients made things. And the other aspect of poiesis is phusis, and phusis is what we normally translated as the Greek word for nature. But Heidegger says that it doesn't mean that. What it means is that phusis, as we have seen, was the original understanding of being. Things coming into being, flashing forth, and then vanishing. But he says in this essay, the specific connotation is that phusis is the means whereby something brings itself into being by itself. It's not made. Poiesis is the means whereby something is brought forth by someone. Phusis is like a plant coming into being and flowering. Things come into being from out of themselves. That too is a mythological idea. There are two different creation myths, actually. One whereby a maker creates the world, as we have inherited it in our biblical tradition and in a lot of the world's mythologies. But there's another type of myth that involves, very often it's a mother goddess who simply, as in Hesiod's Theogony, in the beginning, Gaia simply gives birth to her consort Uranus without being inseminated. She spontaneously produces. So the other creation myth is the world spontaneously, autopoietically making itself from out of itself. So he's got those are two hidden myths here behind his ideas about bringing forth. But then he says, so what he wants to know is, what is it that actually happens in this process of bringing forth? What is it that happens? And he says, bringing forth brings out of concealment into unconcealment. So it's the same thing then, structurally speaking, as the truth process of aletheia. Because he's going to say that technology itself is a way of revealing. It's a truth, it's part of it, it has its own truth process. It's a mode of aletheia, of revealing. Techne was the Greek word that applied to both the making of art objects as well as tools, and it was poiesis, it was poetic. There was something poetic about the traditional Greek idea of techne. So he says technology too is a mode of aletheia, a mode of revealing, and this is not just true of the ancient technology of poiesis and techne, but it's also true of the modern form of technology. And so he says, what is this revealing? And this will tell us what the essence of technology is. What type of revealing does modern technology do? And it turns out that what it does is it's the revealing that rules in modern technologies, it says, is a challenging which puts to nature the unreasonable demand that energy can be extracted from it and stored up relentlessly. And so it sets upon nature, it's in a very predatory way, sets upon it, pounces on it, breaks it up, ravages it, extracts resources, and stores them up so that they're in a state of what he calls standing reserve, so that they're always on demand for use at a later time. And so this is the way that science, technology especially, the way it looks out upon the world. It looks out upon a landscape, for example, and doesn't see it the way a poet or an artist would see it. It sees it as a sum total of potential possible things, that forms of energy that can be extracted from it. Nitrogen that can be pulled out of the air, ore that can be pulled out of the earth, uranium that can be extracted out of the ore, atomic energy that can be the basis from out of which uranium is used for, and so on. It's this constant process of breaking up nature and extracting energy and putting them on demand in the form of standing reserve. And so that's the essence of what technology does. It challenges nature and it sets upon it. It's a challenging and a setting upon nature. And this is to be contrasted, this attitude that science busts nature up, basically, which is really what he's saying. Like he says, the difference between a hydroelectric dam set into the Rhine is that it turns the river into a thing in which the energy is extracted to turn the turbine to generate electricity. Whereas in the old type of technology, the bridge that spanned the bank from one bank to the other was not disruptive. Not at all a disruptive force. So he doesn't mean that this is the way all technology works. Only modern technology, the large-scale systemic type of technology that ravages the earth. Now contrast this with the point of view that of the artist, which he talks about in a previous essay that he wrote in 1935 called On the Origin of the Work of Art, in which he says that what the artist does in a work of art is he creates a world. There's a tension in a basic work of art between world and earth is this difficult to understand what he means, but it's this basic ambiguity that's built into every work of art, just as error is the basic ambiguity built into every truth system. Every true work of art has this basic ambiguity centered on the idea of earth, that's in opposition to world, and the world that the artist creates in a given work of art makes being intelligible. It makes possible a world which is intelligible, that is to say, makes being intelligible. So it creates a world, whereas we had seen in Being and Time that what science does is it de-worlds the world. It removes the world from the world, unworlds it, and lifts it up into a theoretical phase space that's entirely abstract and entirely artificial and entirely opposed to what the real world is, to what the actual is. So the artist sets up a world. And what science does, what technology rather in this essay does, is it breaks it up and stores its energy so that it'll be on demand. And he calls this enframing. The German word is Gestell, and he says Gestell normally means a framing object like a bookcase or a skeleton, but in this case he's going to use it to describe our understanding, our modern understanding of being, the scientific understanding of being, as enframing, in which everything in the world is just seen as quantity for extraction and storage, as an endless energy supply put on demand for endless usage. And so he says that we have created a world where everywhere we look, that's all we see now. And so the danger of this is that we have chased out the scientific mode of revealing, the scientific mode of making things true, that is, bringing them out of concealment into unconcealment. The scientific mode of doing this in the world is a danger, because the danger is that it chases out all other modes of revealing. Every other mode of revealing is not only pushed aside, but the actual process of revealing itself is put into jeopardy by this attitude. And so he paints a picture here of modern man as fallen into a trap of his own making, surrounded by this world of nature as standing reserve. It's not even nature anymore, it's just standing reserve. The plane on the tarmac at the runway is not an object, it's in the mode of standing reserve. And this also, human beings then also are taken up by this attitude of enframing, and they too are put into the mode of standing reserve. Hence we get the idea of human resources. So it's a very culturally destructive force. And I think you can see here there's a direct line of affiliation from Nietzsche to Heidegger, from Nietzsche through Spengler to Heidegger, insofar as they all regard science as a destructive force. We had seen that in Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, the Socratic man was the avatar of reason, basically the first scientist, the great theoretical man, who destroyed Greek tragedy by advising Euripides and bringing in rationalism onto the stage and chasing out all the mysterious elements. In other words, the ambiguities, chasing them out, getting rid of other modes of revealing, other modes of aletheia, and just having the one mode of reasonableness being manifest in the tragedy. So these older archaic understandings, these older ways of revealing, the understanding of fate and destiny, Moira, and the sufferings that it causes of these tragic protagonists is all done away with. It's washed out. And so to Heidegger, we can see this very similar to this idea of the Socratic, of Nietzsche's Socratic man as a culturally disintegrative force. The Socratic man becomes, in Heidegger, the enframing aspect of technology that disrupts and it wrecks culture, wrecks the world, de-authenticates it, de-worlds it, and basically just wrecks it. And so he says, so that's what modern technology does, and that's the danger that it poses. But he says that the very thing that poses the danger could also be concealing or could contain within it the salvific force, that which will save us. And it's not real clear to me what the salvific force is, other than that he ends the essay by saying that we have to remember that techne meant for the Greeks basically what we would polarize as art as well as technology. It meant the same for them. And it's a different mode of revealing, and that whatever saves us, whatever comes to rescue us from our fall into technology, which is basically what he's saying, he almost puts it in the language of soteriological language, almost like Walter Benjamin's idea of a Messiah that will come. And indeed he says in the famous interview in Der Spiegel, only a God can save us, he says in that interview. Heidegger was somewhat of a polytheist. His study of the poet Hölderlin kind of led him to an appreciation of the gods, and they figure, religious thinking figures in a very prominent way in Heidegger. This is not an impious man at all. That the salvific force actually will turn out to be art. Art is, if technology wrecks culture, it's art that comes in as the immune system of a culture to repair and destroy the ravages that technology has inflicted. That seems to be what he's saying here. That's my basic understanding of the dialectic between art on the one hand and technology. This is what I wrote about in my new book too, The New Media Invasion, in the final chapter where I talk about the dialectic between art and technology, that technology is a culturally disintegrative force, but that the disturbed sense ratios of a society which are knocked out of balance by new technologies, and in the West this has been the norm for us, is repaired. Those disturbed sense ratios are repaired by artists who go in and produce works of art to balance the ratios and recalibrate them. Heidegger's understanding of the role of the artist is somewhat similar to McLuhan's. That's basically a McLuhan-esque understanding the role of the artist. And Heidegger's understanding of the role that the artist plays in a society is very similar to that. This understanding of the artist as having an ear for the contours of being and for making these other aspects of phenomena that have withdrawn into concealment visible again, so that a society can be continually rejuvenated with new, fresh spiritual energies. And so he ends the essay by saying that something like that needs to happen, or will come to happen, in order to provide us with a new mode of revealing that will demonopolize or push aside the monopoly that science now thinks it has on being, as in framing, as a merely translating the world into a merely quantitative construct. Well, that's fun. So we're going to need, in his later essay, The Turning, he suggests that we will be moving at some point into an epoch beyond this way of understanding as in framing. It's not real clear to me in that essay. I probably need to go back and reread it. What it is that will move us into this turning, Dikera, this age that will move us beyond technology. But anyways, that's the gist of what I wanted to say about Heidegger's essay on the question concerning technology. It's a very important essay, and lots of good insight there. In fact, there's so much insight in that essay that it almost reads like a complete book. There are entire books that don't have as much insight as Heidegger puts into his essays. So they're hard work, they're difficult to read, but they absolutely reward every bit of effort that you put into them. So people get impatient with Heidegger, but this is a man who thought in the same way that the traditional societies cultivate things with care. You grow wine slowly. You cultivate find food slowly. You make beautiful things slowly. It's a process that you can't lose patience with. Otherwise, you're simply a dilettante or an amateur, and you have no business wasting time here. So to read Heidegger, you need to really, it's a commitment. It's like learning a foreign language, but it will open your mind up in new, fresh ways. And that's it.